This is Where Did the Road Go? Our aim is to explore the fringe, to be true skeptics and question openly, to investigate the paranormal, bring light to the dark corners of history, and give a voice to the shunned of science. We deal in mystery and the important questions that these subjects bring to light. What is reality? Who are we? And why are we here? Join us on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com for a full show archive, links to all our social media, upcoming schedule, and much, much more. Now, join your host Soraya on this week's edition of Where Did the Road Go? So tonight on Where Did the Road Go, my guest will be Eric Wlette, and he has an absolutely fantastic theory dealing with the UFO phenomena and poltergeist phenomena. I conducted this interview a couple of days ago, was really happy with this conversation. It's a fascinating idea. We did do a little bit extra for patrons that I'll be putting up later in the week, and if you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com, and you can click right there. It'll tell you how to become a patron for only $3 a month. We also have a forum up. If you want to discuss this show or any other show, feel free to add topics or join in the conversation. It's only been up a couple of weeks, but it's building slowly. So feel free to check that out. Again, that's wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now, without any further ado, let's talk with Eric Wlette. And I'm talking tonight with Eric Wlette and his new book, Illuminations, the UFO Experience as a Parapsychological Event, is it's something I'm really impressed with, Eric.
Well, I'm very glad that you like it. I hope that your listeners will also find it very interesting. I think I'm proposing something new and fresh to understand the world of UFOs.
Yeah, and that's something that's really needed in the UFO community is some very fresh ideas in this one. And it's out on Anomalous Books, and I find that most of the time when stuff comes out on Anomalous Books, it's quality stuff. So yours actually popped up as a recommendation on Amazon when I was looking something up, and then I read the description and went, well, that sounds really interesting. And it is. I don't know if you're completely right, but you've at least added some very good points to the whole discussion.
Well, it was my intent. I don't claim to own the truth. Like many people you will find in the UFO field, I am really pushing an idea and a hypothesis to try to unstuck the situation, because we've been stuck with mostly the extraterrestrial hypothesis, so the ETH, for a long time, and nothing has moved. So I think we at least should try something different.
And you're a Ph.D. What do you have a Ph.D. in?
I am a sociologist. So my as we will discuss in the book, probably it will show that my interest is really about not only how people interact with the phenomenon of UFOs, but actually larger groups and societies. My original studies were very far from UFOs. I'm more interested in organizations at the time. But yes, so I am a sociologist.
Okay. And you got Jenny Randalls to write your intro for this.
Yes, we approached her, and she was very enthusiastic. And like as she says in the intro, she came to very similar conclusions as what I'm proposing in the book, although her path is very different from mine, which I think it's just adds to the strength of those explanations, that when you approach things from different angles and yet you arrive to very similar conclusions, it shows that it's something worth looking into.
Okay. Now, have you had any UFO experiences yourself?
Yes, I had one and a half, I should say. The one is really fairly recent, 2010. I was outside the store in the winter in Canada, so it's very cold, like upstate New York. So in that sense, we're pretty close. And I was waiting for my kids who were in a store, and at night, and I was looking at the sky, and my eyes were attracted to one star in particular. so more bright than the others. So I thought it was Venus, so I kind of pushed this outside my head, but I was keep looking back to that star, and eventually it started to move by itself, and it disappeared over the horizon in a couple seconds, like it was zapped completely away from the horizon. And I so that was a very interesting event. I can't explain, but the part of it I found it most fascinating is that my attention was drawn to that thing on, and so I found that there's something way beyond the usual explanation of something flying in the sky. It's really the connections between the people and the phenomenon that is really fascinating.
Yeah, and that's very common in a lot of UFO reports where people feel like they have to look up or they have to go to the window and look outside.
Indeed, indeed. And my half experience, this one was, I was very young. I was a kid in the 70s. My brothers were watching something in the sky, and they were very excited and very thrilled to see something. And then they got the binoculars, and then they were looking at it at that thing. So I started to bug them, and eventually they gave me the binoculars, which for me took an eternity, but eventually I got it, and I couldn't see anything. It was either gone or I was not looking in the right direction. And then our parents arrived and they saw nothing as well. So I was, I would say, a witness to a UFO experience, but I was not part of the UFO experience itself, which kind of make me, I think it had a lot of influence on my thinking that, there's the experience itself and the experience I was seen by others, which are two different things.
Yeah, how long have you been interested in studying UFOs?
It's been on and off, I would say, but like when I was a kid, I was a little bit interested. Then I put that aside, and then I resumed being interested for the last, I would say, 20 years, and then being very seriously interested in about last 10 years.
Okay. Now, have you written any other books on this subject?
No, I wrote in academic journals on the topic of UFOs. So there's in the Australian Journal of Parapsychology, for instance. So I wrote because I have an academic career, so I try to also push writings in that field. But I don't have any other books on UFOs. I have books on other topics related to my academic work with the military.
Okay. And speaking of that, let's talk briefly about your view of government conspiracies. Obviously, a huge topic in the UFO field. Do you think the governments know more than they're telling? And if so, what do you think they know?
Okay. The thing about the government knowledge about UFOs, we have to look at that from an historical perspective because this has changed over time. It's true that I would say the late 40s and the 1950s and a little bit in the 60s, most governments, at least Western governments, had some interest because they didn't know what it was. They were a bit worried about this. I mean, it was the Cold War, and so they didn't reveal everything they knew about it, but mostly by fear that their surveillance systems and intelligence systems would be elements of it would become known to the Soviet side. So that was the main reason why it was hidden. After the 60s, most governments, Western governments, just gave up on that. Some were more open, like France. They really worked closely with civilians, tried to understand the phenomenon. But and I'm sure there are some files that are still classified, but not because there is anything out of this earth, but simply because they want to protect, their intelligence-related assets and technology. So, but do they hide a big, huge conspiracy? Well, I don't think so. I haven't seen any evidence of that. And those who claim to have evidence, if you look at it very closely, it's quite flimsy. So that's one thing. The second one is to look at it from a more sociological perspective. Is that if they had hiding something, eventually something would come out. I mean, it took only 2 years to figure out the Watergate by two journalists working part-time on it. I mean, the President of the United States, the most powerful man on earth, using former CIA people to spy on the other party, which would be, the most refutation of democracy you can imagine. And it was found out very easily. People talk. So if there was something that big, it would be out in the open long, long time ago. And the last point is that I work with the military. I mean, senior military officers. I've been teaching for them, to them for over a decade now. So I understand quite well how they think, how they see the world. And really, the UFO topic is, most of them are so profoundly indifferent to that. It's breathtaking how indifferent they are.
Okay. And what do you say to people who, point to things like Roswell?
Well, Roswell, I mean, if some people did a very detailed analysis of the evidence available, and one of them came out with there's only 7 people who actually saw that thing, whatever it was, and of those 7 people, 5, and the 5 of them are military, didn't see anything special about it. So there's only comes down to 2 people who thought that there might be something really weird about this. It's pretty thin if you think about it, if you look at the evidence from that perspective. And then all the rest of the story is hearsays and rumors. And I mean, books like Philip Corso that exaggerate things, and then we all discover after thorough analysis that almost all of it is fabrication. So, in the end, I think in the Roswell story, there's not a whole lot.
Okay. Do you think there's any level of government that may understand, for instance, what's really going on? Not so much an extraterrestrial idea, but may have a better idea of what the phenomena really is?
At the present time, I don't know, but I would think that most governments in the world have absolutely no interest in the phenomenon. So that I'm pretty sure of that. However, if you go on the public website of the CIA, they had some interest in the 70s and 80s, and they look into the issue from a parapsychology perspective. So I think that their thinking was, I mean, for the few there in the CIA that had an interest in that, I think the thinking was going in the same direction, that there's something paranormal or parapsychological, but again, they were just probably speculations, and that's why they gave up, because they didn't have evidence, and they had probably much bigger fish to fry.
I mean, they also seem to be experimenting with mind control and just manipulation with UFO groups and stuff as well.
Yeah, there's probably been some experiments that have been done in the past. Very unfortunately, that's I would think that happened. The evidence on this is kind of not 100% sure, but yes, unfortunately, it might have happened. Yeah.
All right. Can you explain, first of all, the parapsychological view in general? Because it doesn't involve the other; it just involves the internal, like creating the event. Correct?
That's correct. This is it's more than semantics here. It's a very important distinction. So when people talk about the paranormal in general, they usually imply that there is other, either ghosts or spirits, demons, angels, or aliens from another world. Well, parapsychology looks at events that are unexplainable, but as an expression of human capacity, human our unknown or poorly understood capacity to influence reality through things like psychokinesis and telepathy. So it's an important distinction.
Okay. And the main thing you point to is the view of poltergeist cases.
Yes. In my book, I'm using a model that was developed by a parapsychologist from Germany, Walter von Lukadu, and but to study poltergeist. But poltergeist, from a point of view of parapsychology, is not a spirit or some sort of ghosts, or one individual in conjunctions with his or her environment, so the other people around, who through the use of psychokinesis, so mind over matter, make things move, create sounds, sorry, and and really create a situation that is really strange and weird. But that's an individual or person and a group of persons that are involved in that. And so I'm using that model, but on a different scale, to look at could UFO unfold as a poltergeist. And so my book, a good chunk of my book is using that approach.
And we've noted on this show many times before that for instance, if someone sees a light in the sky, it must be extraterrestrials. But you see a light in in a house, the same type of light in a house, and now it's a ghost.
Absolutely, and that's really here an issue of you know the perception of something that is out of place, that is strange, that is bizarre. That's one thing, and then the interpretation of that bizarre thing is quite another one. And we know that the way we interpret things has a lot to do with what we believe and what we have in our minds. So it's very important to look into that aspect of us human, our culture or beliefs or individual psychology, how it's actually taint or how we rapport, how we describe strange phenomena.
And in the book, one of the things you mention is that you lay out a whole part segment of how poltergeist phenomena unfold, but you also say that if you can figure out who it's coming from and get them actually help with the problems they're dealing with, because these are often unconscious expulsions that are creating the poltergeist. The poltergeist activity tends to go away.
Absolutely, and that is there's a lot of empirical evidence to support that. That when we have a poltergeist situation, there's one person usually suffering psychologically a lot, but for whatever reasons cannot express that pain, that suffering. Usually because social dynamics around them is very bad, so they don't speak. And so that pain becomes unconscious, but in some situation, the unconscious use non-normal means, so mind over matter, to express that pain so that they can get the help they need. And once that the person starts to talk about the real issue that caused their pain, usually we see a very drastic reduction of the paranormal phenomena in a poltergeist event.
Okay, and do you want to explain the typical steps there in a poltergeist case?
Yes. The von Lukedu, who studied empirically a number of cases in Germany and in Europe, found that they all tend to unfold the same way. So there is a period where it starts very gently, and this is a phase that he called surprise. So it starts gently, and then people are surprised that weird things happen, strange noises, and so the immediate environment, so usually a family or a workplace, start to wonder what's going on. But at that point, they're not really sure. They don't make any strong hypothesis about the paranormal force, or they're just kind of not too sure. And usually it takes more. It starts to grow in intensity, but at that point, we usually have people who are strong believers in the paranormal that arrive on the scene. Either it's ghost hunters or all kinds of people who wants to clear houses of spirits. And by their very action, they actually reinforce the belief that it's something paranormal out of this world that is causing that. And this has a strange effect that then everybody believes that's what it is, which reinforce then anything will appear as being part of the poltergeist event, even a normal thing. But the person who's suffering, the attention is displaced from him or her towards a alleged spirit or alleged ghost, And that's why you call this second phase the displacement. The attention is displaced away from the focused person, the person who's really suffering. And then there's a third phase. Eventually, there are people a little bit more skeptical that arrives on the scene. Either they're scientists or they could be social services, depends of the case. And they ask a lot more thorough questions. They're much more critical observers of what's going on. And they usually at that point start to figure out that the phenomenon is usually happening when the focused person is in a particular room or in a particular building. So they start to associate the phenomenon with a person, and then usually that's when the phenomenon start to decline in intensity. But also, then the person, the focused person, the person suffering starts to get attention. What ultimately what they need and what they want. So there's less need to use the non-normal means to communicate their pain on one hand, but on the other hand, they tend also to get a lot of attentions because of the phenomenon. So oftentimes in that time, the person who's the focused person starts to engage in cheating or hoaxing, so just to continue to have the attention. And oftentimes they get caught. So that's that phase. That's the third phase that is called the decline. And then there's a fourth phase at the end. It's called suppression. Is that when the rest of society, so when it gets into the press or the police is involved or the municipality, whatever is the case, then they say, okay, that was a hoax and that's it. We don't want to hear about this because it's very disturbing, a poltergeist event. And that put full closure to the event and it usually stops completely. So you have a bit like a bell curve of events. And so that's the model of proposed by von Wlette, used for studying UFO waves.
Okay, and you give the Enfield poltergeist case as like a perfect example of that model.
Absolutely. I don't know how much your auditors are, your listeners, sorry, are aware of that case, but it follows very well that situation. You have the Society for Psychical Research gets involved, and then more critical observers, former magicians, or much more critical. And then at the end, it's just the girl admit that she did some hoaxing, although she claims that a lot of other things were not hoax, and there's good reason to believe her as well. And then, eventually it's completely end. But the little girl in question, she was living a trauma because her parents just divorced. She ended up being in a social housing, so a situation that with all her sisters and brother. And so she her little world was falling apart very quickly, but for some reason she were not able to express that. So here's a very good case to illustrate the model talked about by von Wlette.
Okay. Now, there's a little bit of history here of paranormal idea with UFOs.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of UFO events have a degree of paranormal or parapsychological aspects to them. Whether it's telepathy, premonition, either that there is actually poltergeist events that occurs during a UFO event or just after. And also people having after having a UFO experience, they tend to be more psychically aware. So they seem to have a period of time where they seem to be more in tune with what people are thinking, what the future holds. And so it seems that we cannot really drastically separate the UFO experience from the realm of the paranormal.
Yeah, and I know like Kenneth Ring did his study on the Omega Project, looking at the after effects of near-death experiences and UFO contact, and found that very same thing, that there's a lot of paranormal stuff going on after the initial encounter.
That's correct, and even people that we think that had a purely I would say physical, strictly physical UFO experience, they are actually mixed up with all kinds of paranormal event. The famous case of Barney and Betty Hill. Uh, Something that a lot of people don't really know is that they had before the event, they actually practicing telepathy as a couple. So already they had an interest in the parapsychology. And then afterward, they had a few weird things happening to them as well. So that they mentioned. So even a case like that that seems to be so nuts and bolts, there's actually other aspects to it that we should not forget.
Yeah. Um, so do you want to lay out? You give three main examples in the book of UFO waves that fit this poltergeist like phenomena. Do you just want to pick one of those and give people an idea of what you're talking about?
Sure. In the book, I present three case studies using the model, so the bell curve, if you want, of the UFO. Sorry, from the poltergeist realm. I can. So one is the 1952 Washington D.C. UFO wave. Another one is the Belgian UFO wave of 1989, 1991. And the last one, it's not really a UFO wave, but it's a well-known event. It's the Reldersham UFO incident of 1980, which also unfolded in ways very similar to the bell curve. I'll use the Belgian one because I think that's a big UFO wave. It's relatively recent. I mean, it's getting old now, but and the thing is, it has a lot of similarities. So the wave started very gently. There are a few observations that were recorded, and but no one was really thinking about the wave at the time. But then one night, boom, there was over 100 observations that were made. Some involving, and it's very well documented, so involving the police, many police officers reporting things that were very, very weird. Um, so it started like boom as a surprise, and then the newspaper picked up the story quickly. Uh, but they were actually relatively, I would say, level-headed. They say, okay, there's something weird going on. We don't know what it is. It may be aliens from outer space. It may be something else. We don't know. But then the wave continue with a number of days where there's a lot also of observations. And that's when then at that point that a UFO group, a major UFO group in Belgium got involved. And then they eventually were able to secure the support of the police and mostly the military in Belgium to help them out because the Ministry of Defense in Belgium was also wondering what's going on. And the police was overwhelmed with UFO reports, so it was a good way to get rid of the problems and just tell people, call that UFO group, don't call us. But the net effect is that their involvement actually created a lot more observation, although less intense in every day. But if you take them collectively, a lot of observation occurred, and which led to a major press conference that they gave. And the military was present at the press conference, giving a lot of legitimacy to the group. And that's where they said, we tend to see triangles, objects, and they tend to be in certain ways, which actually it's partially correct. Because if you look at the data, only 50% of all the UFO cases they had involve triangular objects. All the other cases were other things, balls, you had spheres, you had squares. I mean, you had all kinds of things going on. And so that's really, so we have the surprise and then the displacement. And then that story, interestingly, keeps moving towards I would say the most dramatic event where the Belgian military start to chase UFOs in the sky. of Belgium in March of 1990. And eventually they produced a report and where a lot of things unexplainable are presented. And that's where, interestingly, the case started to decline. There's still UFO events, but it declined gently, which is a bit of a variation of the official model, because you can say that the critical observers, the military, who had a lot of very advanced equipment to study these things, did not rebuke the UFO group. They just say there's something weird, we cannot explain that. They never said they were agreeing with any alien explanation. So it still declined, but more gently, I would say, than other cases. And eventually the case stopped. I mean, there was no more UFO, very few. So we can say that the suppression phase happened. But I would say from a social perspective, the suppression phase of the UFO wave is happening right now, where you have a lot of people who wrote with the hindsight saying, oh, no, there was just a mass illusion, and we should not talk about UFO anymore, and etc., etc. So it kind of followed the whole curve of a bell curve of events that you see in a UFO, in a poltergeist case.
Okay, and in a poltergeist case, though, we have a subject that we can point to where the activity sort of circles around. How would that work in a UFO case?
Yes, in the case of the Belgian UFO, there's some of the usual characters that are easily identifiable. So we have all the witnesses. I would say the people are the environment. So that's they are partaking in the whole events, but they're not the one causing it. So you have many witnesses involved here. Then the ones that are really trying to displace is the UFO group over there. I mean, they're very good, very thorough people, but they're still seeking to prove that the extraterrestrial hypothesis is the right one. So they were displacing the events. So they're clearly there as a group. The group of more critical observers was kind of there were people writing in mostly in French magazine, science magazine, denouncing all those people, and they keep doing it even today. So they were involved. The military had a kind of an ambiguous role here, which makes that case a little bit different than others. In a way, they were more critical observers, but at the same time, they were not denouncing the mystery. That they say that there are things that they could not explain. So that's a little bit of a variation. And society in general, kind of, at least 20 years later, kind of say, you know what, nothing happens. So that brings us to who would be the people suffering. What would be the focus persons involved in that? So there's no obvious one, and that's one of the problem in UFO cases. This seems to be not apparent. But we have to remember that the UFO wave of Belgium happened exactly at the same time as the fall of the Berlin Wall and all the revolutions that were going in on the Eastern Bloc. So in East Germany, Hungary, Czech Republic, it was and the more violent revolution in Romania. So all these UFO events happened exactly at the same time. And then also we have to remember that Belgium is also the land of NATO. The political headquarters are in Brussels. The military headquarters are in Mons, which is just not far from Brussels. And so, and very quickly, people start to ask, oh, there's no more Soviet bloc, so there's no need for NATO anymore. And so wondering if there's people on the eastern side of the Iron Curtain that was very worried that the government of their countries might use force and violence to force back everybody into a communist regime. And in a way, they were hoping that NATO gets involved So, but they couldn't speak because they were stuck in the other side of the Iron Curtain, and so in a way that was their way to call in for help to NATO. Now, this is very speculative, of course, but we have to look at the actual UFO event itself for some clues. Some of the interesting UFO description is there's some very interesting symbolism in it. If we think about the famous triangular objects, they all have three white lights at each of the corner of the triangle, and a weak red light in the middle. It's interesting to remember that NATO and the West, it's a white star, the symbol, and the Soviet bloc, it was a red star. So it's as if the red star was surrounded by a white star. That's one aspect. The other dimension of it, again, if we talk about the triangles, is a lot of the descriptions of the objects from the witnesses is very reminiscent of a metal sculpture in front of the NATO building in Brussels, and that's dark metal and made of triangles. So a series of triangles together that makes the star of NATO, the famous symbol of NATO. And again, the parallel is very striking. So again, maybe it's a symbolic cue towards that. And some of the actual events involve, for instance, using red balls, fishing in water. So again, it's this notion that people from the red side try to get help from the other side of the curtain. So there's a number of symbolism that points in the direction that maybe people on the other side of the curtain were the focused person. So it's speculative, yes, but I think it's an alternative explanation that worth considering seriously.
Okay. Now, would it be maybe a social group that's sort of generating this out of like a collective unconscious, as Jung would say?
Yes, Poltergeist is a very small scale event. It's a family very often, but UFO would be the same thing, but at the level of the collective, so a nation. So the focused person would actually be a focus group, a group of people who can't speak and that they're very worried, or they have very serious psychological pain that they share collectively at the same time. So yes, we can call it some sort of a collective unconscious that activates some sort of collective parapsychological event, and so becomes a bigger show than a family poltergeist. But the overall dynamics, so the overall structure of events is very similar.
Okay. Now, that's for a UFO wave. For a singular sighting, like someone out driving along sees a UFO and it has a profound effect on them, would that be closer to like a poltergeist event happening with that one person?
I would say that the poltergeist model to look at those single events probably not the good way to approach it, because by definition, a poltergeist is something that repeats itself for a few weeks, a few months, and so in that case, I would not say that it's the good model. However, there are sub-elements within poltergeist drawn from parapsychology. So if we think about psychokinesis, so mind over matter, or extrasensory perception, so accessing information through non-normal means, that are very often embedded into those single events. I'll give you an example of it was here in Canada not long ago, a few weeks ago. There was two groups of people in cars, so each in one car, waiting at a stoplight, a busy stoplight in the middle of the day in Hamilton, Canada, so it's just south of Toronto. And they both groups saw a UFO. And it was low on the horizons and not very far. At a very busy intersection, and yet only those two people saw it. So it's kind of strange. So you can think that maybe actually there was nothing physical there per se, because it would have been noticed, it would have been on radars. I mean, there would be a big fuss about it, and obviously there was not a big fuss. Um, but that doesn't mean that their quote-unquote hallucination was purely subjective. There are several individuals who saw almost the same thing. So we can see that maybe there was some sort of expression of something that took a telepathic turn. What that something is, again, that's the hard part when we study these events. But parapsychology is still useful here to try to at least put some markers to better understand these events. Um, and it's really in the symbolism that what they saw at the time that would be the key. Now, I wouldn't be surprised that these two groups of people maybe bump into each other in the future, which kind of would connect them. They got connected at one point. There's probably some reasons why they got connected. And they may meet again without even knowing that they were each other the observers of that UFO.
All right, we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Eric Wlette.
Where Did the Road Go can be heard first and usually live on WVBR, Saturday nights at 11 p.m. Eastern. Go to wheredidtheroadgo.com to ask questions of our live guests through the chat room. Where Did the Road Go is then re-aired on Dark Matter Radio and Deprogrammed Radio. You can download all shows for free on the website, and you can subscribe to us on Stitcher, iTunes, YouTube, or Vimeo. Additional content can be found on our video channels. You will also find our upcoming schedule, book reviews, blogs, free book downloads, links, and more. We are also on Facebook and Twitter, and if you want to help support the show, there are links to donate to us. Everything you need can be found at wheredidtheroadgo.com.
And we're talking tonight with Eric Wlette, author of Illuminations, the UFO Experience as a Parapsychological Event. It's out on Anomalous Books. And when was this published?
2015, so about 6 months ago.
Okay. And how long did it take you to put this work together?
Well, I started to look at the UFO phenomenon. Very seriously, actively writing about 10 years ago. I had a blog in French. I lasted about a year and a half. And then I decided to write in English because the readership is much bigger in English than in French. So in a way, it took about 10 years, although it's not just collecting the information. It's really trying to wrap my head around all these so disparate events of so many different descriptions of things that seem to have no connections among each other. And it's eventually stumbling on parapsychology, where I could see that in spite of the appearances of that seem so different between, let's say, a poltergeist and UFO, they seem to have a lot of things in common. And so that's how my idea started to get to shape. So it took a long time, but not to get the information as much as finding the right explanation.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the Mothman prophecies in here. And you mentioned that this may have all been, what may have generated it is some kind of foreknowledge of the Silver Bridge collapse that the people may have had without knowing that they had that information.
That's correct. I think it's one of the very interesting cases because right after the bridge collapse, and a lot of people in that town were lost someone dear to them. The UFO phenomenon that was first interesting kills stopped very quickly after it, and the apparitions of the Mothman and a whole slew of other events, Poltergeist among others, kind of declined very quickly afterward. So in a way, it seems to show that once again, once the psychological pain, and in this case it might be a premonition of something painful, but because people did not know what it was, and it was very unconscious, so they could not express it by default. It took other means, and once that thing happened, then there's no need to express it anymore, and it stopped. So I find that, again, the explanation proposed from parapsychologists, even though the scale is completely different from a family poltergeist, it still holds quite well.
Well, why wouldn't we see events like this then leading up to, say, 9/11?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, because you could think that people in families, oftentimes teenagers, having problems, pain, and having a hard time to express themselves because of family dynamic is not very good. That's not that hard to find. And yet, poltergeist events are relatively rare events. And so I would say that the same situation happens at the collective level. It's not every time that we have an issue that will social issue that we can't really express, that will find a way to express itself through paranormal events. That being said, however, there was some research done by a group of parapsychologists who had the number machines that generates numbers randomly, and they noticed that the ordering of the numbers, if I can speak, if I can use that expression, seems to be off randomness in the hours preceding 9/11. And that is very interesting. It's as if somehow there was a degree of precognition, and that degree of precognition was socially shared, but of course, because it's unconscious, no one really clued in about what it was. But there's still, even in that case, something to it.
Right. Okay. Now, would this also work, like a lot of UFOs are seen around military bases and nuclear installations, and obviously there's always some level of stress involved with those type of installations. Would that be why they seem to be focused there?
I would say that there's a couple of things we have to keep in mind here. I would say historically, it's true that military installations were reporting more often UFOs, but I think it's just a reporting effect. Is that military people, especially in sensitive installations, they are on the lookout always of people coming in, and whether spies or today we talk about terrorists. So because they're more on the lookout, chances are that they will see something weird more often than in a more mundane setting. That's one part of it. If we talk about tensions, yes, probably has something to do with it, because if you're working in a sensitive area, then you obviously more stressed. I mean, you have a lot of rules to follow. If I mean, I had to work on classified stuff, and it's such a pain in the butt, just to be able to use Word to write something. It's really complicated. So people are more stressed. So that's certainly part of it. With nuclear plant, here there's something else that maybe play in equations, is that some, I think, of the UFO events are probably linked to what we call earthlights, or some sort of natural plasma that are highly magnetized. And when you have a nuclear plant, because it produces electricity, it has higher magnetism. And so it would make sense that these balls of plasma are be quote unquote attracted because of the magnetism towards those nuclear plants and power plants. And so therefore there might be a more physical explanation as why there will be more UFOs around nuclear plants.
Okay. I was actually just going to ask you about plasma and earth lights. I mean, how more do they play a part in this whole thing?
Well, I don't think they explain everything, but the ones that have a more physical or easily demonstrable physical aspects to them, I'm sure they play a much bigger role. I mean, a lot of research has been done about that, and we see more and more that they are the culprit. I mean, there's Paul Devereux made a major books on that in the 1980s, and I think he was able to show that how important they play a role in the overall UFO perception. That doesn't mean they are present all the time. The other aspects of them also is that because they are so highly magnetized, they seem to when we're close to them, seems to have an impact on our brain. And some research shows that the paranormal or parapsychological capacity, so either psychokinesis or telepathy and things like that, seems to be more. We seem to be more prone to have these types of experiences when we're under a lot of magnetism. So again, it seems that there is a relationship between perceptions, electromagnetism, Earth lights, and UFO events. They seem to connect in a number of cases. I'm not saying they're there all the time, but in a number of cases we can see that nexus of conditions to create a very weird UFO experience.
Yeah. Now, do we see more UFO reports during high solar activity?
That jury is out on this. It seems that when we have maximas of solar activities and when we have minimas, there seems to be more UFO activities. It's now the research and the data on this is start to be dated. So I don't know if we do research on this again, how well that hypothesis will survive. But there seems to be some sort of relationship between UFO waves and or at least seeing a lot of UFOs and solar cycles.
Well, I know Robert Schoch had published a book, and it suggested that psychic abilities, like when they test them in laboratories and stuff, the people being tested do better during periods of high solar activity.
Indeed, there is some research on that. I remember also some research of people gambling and try to predict whatever the dice or the things, and it seems to be linked somewhat to solar activities. So there seems to be something there. The evidence we have points in that direction, but it's not a clear-cut case.
Yeah, but it seems like it might play a part in, if UFOs are mostly paranormal, it seems like solar activity might play a part in that as well.
Yes, I think so. It does, but I think the way how it plays might be very complex and subtle. So, unfortunately, I would say in this day and age, we don't have a lot of investigated UFO reports as it was in the past, for all kinds of reasons, but mostly because UFO groups are there's way less now than there was in the past, and they are volunteers, and there's their time and their money, so not many people have the time to do in-depth investigation to see if was there anything actually odd about the sighting or not. So today's it's hard to assess if there's more UFOs because of the capacity to assess the reporting is weaker now than it was in the past.
Okay, let's talk about the electromagnetism that's connected with UFOs. How does this play in?
Well, the research done in the past seems to indicate that parapsychological abilities, which are usually linked to unconscious mental processes, are more, how can I say, electromagnetism in some occasions creates what we call altered states of consciousness. So you're a little bit in trance or you're off. And because your conscious mind is kind of on the side and your unconscious mind kind of goes to the front seat, then there's a possibility that those parapsychological capacities more effectively happening. So that's one aspect. The other one also is that it seems that the human mind is able to interact with electromagnetic systems. We notice in poltergeist events that the electrical equipment seems to behave in certain ways that let's say angry because the focus person is angry. So you will have light bulbs bursting, for instance. Also, Paul Devereux in his research said that he saw one of those Earth lights from very close, and when he was thinking of it to go in a particular direction, it was actually going in that particular direction. Or if he was thinking of it having a certain behavior, it started to have this behavior. So it seems that the electromagnetism has a two-way street. So they influence our brain to make us go into a state of trance, and then we may have some hallucinations. But also, it seems that we can influence those electromagnetic systems. So that's a very interesting approach to the whole phenomena.
So you think this would be the same reason like cars stall out during UFO reports and such?
I think so. I think that has a lot to do with that, and especially if you do have Earth light, with the car will not like the electrical systems will be disturbed by the electromagnetism, or it could be a psychokinesis. So the person involved does influence the electrical system. There's been some very serious research, by the way, on more sensitive systems like computers. The state of mind of people seems to affect computers that misbehave. Because it seems to affect some of the electronic components, at least for a short period of time. And the research about that was serious enough that there were people worried about the electronics of airplanes. If pilots were in a very bad mood, they may actually make some system not functioning properly. And there is some evidence to show that it seems to be correct, that the hypothesis, at least we are pointing in the right direction with that.
Okay. One of the things you mentioned is the falling leaf motion. I think you were talking about Shag Harbor at the time, but you say it's a common indication of or something that happens commonly in poltergeist cases. Can you explain that a little?
Sorry, I just missed the beginning of your question.
Oh, the falling leaf motion. You mentioned it, I think, in
Yes.
relation to Shag Harbor.
Yes, the objects that fall, like if you take a feather, it will go left and right and go down slowly. This has been noticed in many poltergeist stories going back hundreds of years. And we know that a number of UFO observations involves also the object, the light, to fall in that same kind of motion. So it seems again that we have the same phenomena just on a different scale. So that's further indication that seems that we have something in common here.
Right. What kind of stuff in poltergeist cases falls like that?
Number of them. One of them is in a typical poltergeist events, people will, in the same room, something moves or there's a noise, or people hear voices coming from nowhere, but they won't hear the same thing. So that's one example. So some people have UFO experience and they see aliens, for instance, but they don't see the same thing. There are some variations, and that are hard to explain. So that's one similarity. Another similarity is the notion. How can I say? People having enhanced sensitivity, let's call it telepathy, where or premonition, that people feel something's going to happen and does happen. And same thing in UFO. People feel that something's going to happen. They look in the sky and they see a weird light moving around. So that's another example. And then you have, I would say, some cases where you don't know if you're talking about a poltergeist or UFO event, because it seems to be the same story. There is a case that was happening in upstate New York, actually, where a couple living in a remote area in the forest saw two big lights near their house, and those lights kind of merged and disappeared. But at the same time, There was very strange noise and banging in the house, and they started to hear voices, which are typical of poltergeists, but the lights in the field moving around is clearly more UFO. So in that case, is it a UFO event? Is it a poltergeist? Or actually, does it make any sense to make a distinction between those two events? So you have also cases like that we can't separate the two. And of course, if you think about the very famous case studied by Jacques Vallée and others, but Vallée was quite involved, Dr. X, where he saw balls of lights, but after that, everything else is poltergeist story. There's strange healings, strange marks that disappears, then objects that move by themselves in the house for a while. So again, if you have an event that it's very hard to separate what is what. In that case, is it a UFO or poltergeist? And my opinion is that actually it doesn't make sense to separate them, because there are parapsychological forces at play, and it's just so the UFO thing is just one expression of it, but this doesn't change the structure.
But what I meant is what kind of objects in poltergeist cases use that falling leaf motion? Like, when is that seen?
All the kind of objects, or anything. It could be something very hard, like an iron to for clothes. It could be rocks that does that. So it can be all kinds of things. But that's what makes these events very strange, is that they are very heavy things, and they still have that motion. And if you look at UFO, well, we don't know what they are. So when the witness only see a light, usually falling that way. So all I can say, if you talk about the actual objects, is that the actual weight of the object doesn't seem to have any impact on why it takes that motion.
I didn't know that happened in poltergeist cases. I mean, I knew stuff gets thrown and moved and stuff, but I didn't realize there was ever an incident of falling leaf. So that's really interesting. Let's talk about something you mentioned in the beginning, the Betty and Barney Hill case, because everyone's familiar with this who studies UFOs, even slightly. But the way you go through this and pull out the bare facts, this isn't what it seems.
That's correct. Unfortunately, for all kinds of reasons, good and bad, the way that case has been presented, it tends to be shown as a straightforward, nuts and bolt issue. They were driving at night, and then they got under the mental power of aliens. They got into the spaceship. And then they were released, and then go back home, and they never. And it's only after going to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist with hypnotic regression that the full story came out to light. But that, if you read the book, the original book by Fuller, it's not at all what happened. What happened is, first of all, Betty was very much into UFOs. She had a sister who had a UFO experience. And so when they got back home, the first thing she did is call her sister to talk about that. And then she borrowed a book from Keogh about UFOs, and she read it in one sitting. And then she met she wrote to the NICAP, and then met some investigators, and then she told her story of her dreams, actually, that she had dreams about her experience to UFO people. People interested in UFO stuff, where Barney was in the room. So again, the not very careful ufologist tells us, oh, no, they never talked about it, and it was only revealed during the hypnotic regression. Is completely false. I mean, Barney was in the room when Betty was telling her stories. So eventually, when they saw the psychiatrist, because Barney was very depressed, it's 2 years after, and a lot have happened during those 2 years. So this notion that that repressed memory is very questionable. But that doesn't mean, and that's my point here, is that nothing unusual happened to them. It's just that maybe it's not what we think it is. Because one of the very interesting aspects of their story is actually the end, when they are quote unquote released. They are beside a ball of fire, and for me, that's an earthlight. So they may actually have been in a state of altered consciousness from a ball of fire, and so they lost track of time, and some of their very physical events, so that their clothes were damaged. I mean, if you walk in the forest at night, very easy to damage your clothes. So these can be explained in a number of ways. But furthermore, if we look deeper, is the timing of the event, that and some of the elements that they remembered, because at the very same time that what happened to Betty and Barney, it was also the time of the civil rights movements, and among other things, the free ride movement. So people were taking buses, white and black or African American, and purposefully violate the laws of some states in the South, where there was segregation, where you could sit, African American and white people. And that led to, actually, interestingly enough, interrupted journeys, because those buses were stopped by state lines. There was police and demonstrators beating up the people who were in the bus. And it's interesting to note that if we look at the map that Betty was shown, allegedly, by the aliens, is very similar to a map that was produced about a year and a half later in the newspaper of the route of the Freedom Riders. It's very similar construction of the lines. So I'm just wondering if it was not some sort of collective unconscious forces, because they were a mixed couple, and if you read the details of the hypnotic regression for Barney, especially the fact that he was an African American in a white world of 1960s, he was very affected by that. And so I was wondering if there's some sort of also repressed psychological pain that was expressed through non-normal means, but kind of connected with the larger pain of social pain that was expressed through the social right movements. And it took that kind of a very specific pieces of knowledge, like the map that Betty got, which was probably could have been seen as a premonition of what was going to happen, because the map was published after the event. So it's a very different take, but the straightforward story that we get from nuts and bolts ufologists is profoundly incorrect.
Okay, and what are your thoughts on hypnosis in dealing with all this stuff?
Well, hypnosis actually it's a way to bring the unconscious to the forefront. That's what it is, and but the unconscious is something that is very dynamic. It's not something static, and human memory is also very dynamic. So this idea that you can actually extract repressed memory, and that memory will be as it was lived at the time, is very, very naive. The scientific literature on that is very clear, because human memory, we actually constantly reconstruct our memory. And it explains, for instance, you may have had very unpleasant events, let's say 10, 20, 30 years ago, and now you laugh about it. You change actually how you feel about it, and you change how you actually perceive that event, and that's normal. The brain constantly rearrange knowledge and memory. So hypnotic regressions for getting a clear, detailed, and exact rendering of something I don't think is a very effective method. It's useful to allow people to express their feelings that are repressed, that definitely. But in terms of cognitive memory, that is not a very good tool.
Okay. So what do you think is the thing people are going to misunderstand the most about this theory?
Well, I already encountered some comments. It's the physical nature of UFOs. Uh, in the book, I have a most of a one chapter where I explain and describe what is known about the physical nature of UFOs. And so I'm not venturing into what is being speculated about, but what we can have a fairly good degree of certitude, or at least where the evidence is pointing. And some people gets very upset when I say that there's no physical evidence of alien presence on Earth, but unfortunately, it's true. There's no evidence that we can submit to an impartial and transparent scientific analysis. So it's just not there. And I keep telling the same thing. If you bring me a piece of equipment or organic tissue that is clearly not from this earth, you know what? I will be espousing the ETH immediately. But I'm not holding my breath on that because we have nothing. So that doesn't mean, again, when we talk about UFO, that there's no physical aspect. Earthlight is one dimension. But there are other, and I don't go in details in the book about that. Maybe I should go more in the next book. But you may actually have people who are seeing a real mundane object, a regular plane flying its regular route, but somehow they have an hallucination that kind of make them perceive the plane differently than it actually is. That would make actually, but that hallucination provides information about something. So I would be, even though it's not what it is, it provides you information about the future or about your own situation. So it becomes still a parapsychological event, even though the actual physical object that is triggering part of the observation is not particularly special. For me, it's still a valid UFO case because there's something in the order of parapsychology that can be studied in understanding that hallucination, the content of it, what it means, why it's there. Because there are hallucinations that are not, I would think, not fully subjective. They're the input coming from somewhere else. Call it telepathy if you want. So that's and so you still have a physical object out there, but it's not a spaceship. And in the end, the physical aspect of it, in my view, is a bit secondary because in those UFO events, it's really the symbolic that is the most important. What that event, what those experiences means, and is it something that our unconscious mind tries to communicate to us to help us with some sort of challenges, difficulties, whether it's at the personal level or the collective level. And so I know people will feel uncomfortable with that type of view. A lot of people are, because for them, as soon as you talk UFO, it's exactly synonymous to an alien spaceship. But for me, UFO is what it is. It's an object that we don't know what it is. And there might not be actual physical object there. It can be an hallucination, but that doesn't mean that the story is not interesting to study because it is just an hallucination.
And even the physical traces that we get are generally very common earthly things.
Yes, well, if you go to the physical objects, the traces at the left, Jacques Vallée keeps saying the same thing. They are absurd. They seems to be just a piece of dirt that have been transported from 100 miles away or 2,000 miles away, but it's still from this earth. So is it psychokinesis? Is it just earth light that came out from one place and bringing a few pieces of dust with it, and just when it disappears or dissolves itself, it just the dust just fell where it is? So that's one part. And when we talk about radar traces, they are rarely clear cut. Even the Belgian case, for instance, some people are quoting this when the Belgian Air Force had on their radar. One of the very fascinating thing is that the F-16 jet fighters on their radar, they were able to lock on a few times, and they were able to see on the radar, but they never had the distance, which is very odd because radars is very important in a jet fighter to have the distance, so you know if it's time to engage the object or not. So they were able to follow the object on their radar, but never had the distance. And interestingly, the general was he was colonel then and became general, was in charge. He asked this question to himself: were we chasing electromagnetic disturbances? Because it's very weird that our radar actually do not give that information. It seemed they were not able to. And yet, in the ground, people saw the jets flying around, and they saw other objects, which were not the one the jets were following, traveling in the sky. And then the ground radars of NATO were observing an object that was moving very slowly, about 25 miles per hour, in a fairly straight line across Belgium. And yet you have those jet fighters that was seeing something moving around like crazy, and they try to follow. So when we talk about good quality radar tracing, well, I mean, you have NATO, you have modern F-16s, and yet that evidence is kind of all over the map and is far from being a clear-cut case.
And I think if we were going to have any evidence of, like, say tissue samples or something clearly extraterrestrial, by now we would have it.
I would think so, because I mean, if the amount of UFO events would be linked to extraterrestrials, I mean, sooner or later they would make the mistakes. I mean, they would get in the way one way or another, and yet we don't have anything. So I mean, it defies logic.
So is there room? I mean, I know you approach this theory from the idea that this basically comes from us, just like poltergeist cases, but is there room for an other in this?
Well, I'm not saying that in theory it's impossible, but the push I make is because I would say that the paranormal version of the UFO theory exists. It's already out there, with the good and the bad, but a more strictly parapsychological approach to UFOs, there's very little of that. That's why I stayed very strictly in that realm. I'm not saying it's impossible that there be no other non-human entities that may be part of it, but it's not the hypothesis I'm following for my research, because I think that it's very hard to study a phenomena and then attributing the phenomena to other intelligence that we have absolutely no control over. We don't understand what it is, the intentions. So it's almost impossible to make sense of it, because we cannot study the other as the other and then take that knowledge to understand the more weird phenomena that happens.
Okay. What's up next for you?
I'm working towards a second book. This one is actually more about single observation. So not so much UFO waves and the big thing. I'm working with a colleague of mine to develop, I would say, some sort of model to understand haunting, ghosts, and apparitions, and compare how ghostly apparitions can compare at the structural level with those single events of UFO observations. Because one of the interesting aspects of those who studied seriously ghosts and apparitions, many of them came to the conclusion these were actually hallucinations. But they were not hallucinations in the sense you're crazy, but there was an input from somewhere else that makes you hallucinate. So there's information that you acquire through non-normal means. So the classic case, of course, is someone dies, and then you see that person in your house for a couple of seconds. If there was a camera there would be nothing, but so it was an hallucination. But the knowledge that the person is deceased was received as a non-normal means. So that's a classic case of information that's transmitted that way. And so I'm trying to develop a sound understanding of ghosts from that perspective and apparitions in general, and see if it actually applies well to single UFO events of that nature. So I'm speculating here that most of them are hallucinations, but again, the source of information that feeds the hallucination is not completely subjective. There's some objective reality into it.
And I'm sure there are some people that are going to feel like you're just kind of disenchanting the whole subject of like UFOs and poltergeists and stuff like this. But if anything, I think you're empowering us more.
Well, actually, my secret agenda, if we're talking that way, is try to develop a much larger approach, or call it theory, where all those weird events, all those paranormal events, whether it's ghosts, UFOs, sea monsters, ghost ships, and you name it, all the deep dynamics that behind them is actually the same, which, if I'm correct, it shows that the human mind is very powerful, much more powerful than we think, and we only make use of this mind, this power in our mind, will take a shape that is meaningful to us. So if you're in a house, you will see a ghost. If you're in the field and look at the skies, you will see UFOs, just because our mind is structured in a way to think. And so those special capacity that we have are just expressing themselves based on what we see, what we believe, and what we think. But that actually empower us human beings to embrace those phenomena as an expression of ourselves, and not just an expression of ourselves, but an expression that might be useful, that has useful message to communicate, whether we're in pain, whether there is an important event that's coming up, so we have a premonition, so we can be prepared to do something about it. So in a way, quite the contrary, it's not disenchanting, it's empowering ourselves to use this poorly understood capacity we have, and try to make them something that may be helpful or useful, rather than just being something exotic.
And imagine if we could control that ability.
Yes, I mean that would be certainly a very interesting approach. Some people try that, by the way, to create ghosts. I think there's a lot of promises of people trying to create ghosts, try to create UFO events. It was tried in the past with a degree of success. It was abandoned for all kinds of reasons. I certainly think that it's worth trying again, but maybe what was missing is maybe an overarching theory to approach these things, so that we'll be more effective in actually creating and controlling these types of events.
All right. Once again, the book is Illuminations, the UFO Experience as a Parapsychological Event. It's on Anomalous Books. You can get it at Amazon and probably anywhere else you can get books. And where can people find you on the web?
I have a blog. It's called Parasociology. If you type that word, so you put para in front of sociology, you will come up very quick. And then I post my new ideas, and I'm quite open to people having to want to share experiences, they want to present their own ideas. I'm quite open because, again, I don't claim to have the monopoly of truth in this. I'm researchers, and I'm more than happy to engage with other researchers who are interested to move forward the field.
All right. Well, I highly recommend the book. It's a great piece of work, Eric, and thank you for spending some time with us.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for your very good questions. I enjoyed that thoroughly, and I hope your listeners will also enjoy it as well as the book.
So there you go. There was my conversation with Eric Wlette. And if you want to join in the conversation, please go to the forum and let me know what you think of the theory. Let me know if you think that it is wrong for some reason, or if you think it is right, or if you see any holes in it, or whatever. Let's get a conversation going in the forum, wheredidtheroadgo.com. As I said as well, I have some extra stuff I'm going to be putting up for patrons later on this week. Probably another 10 or 15 minutes with Eric. And if you want to become a patron and get extra stuff here and there, it's only $3 a month, and you can go to wheredidtheroadgo.com to do that as well as, well, anything else Where Did the Road Go related.